Detective Laura Hayes stood in the rain-soaked street, staring at the building before her. The old Victorian house had always been a fixture in her memories, not because of its charm or its history, but because of the way it was tied to a case that had haunted her for years, the Kavanaugh murder. It was one of those cases that didn't leave you, not because of the brutality, although it was certainly horrific, but because it was unsolved. There was no closure. The victims, Jonathan and Amelia Kavanaugh, had been found in their home over 30 years ago, brutally murdered in the dead. Of night, their teenage daughter Ella had vanished without a trace. Some said she was the killer, others claimed she was kidnapped, but there was no definitive answer. No one had ever been able to prove anything. Laura had been a rookie detective when she was assigned the case. Back then, it was an open and shut homicide investigation. But as the years went by and every lead turned cold, it became just another case on her file that she couldn't close. She had made peace with it, or at least that's what she had told herself, until now. A low growl cut through the steady drum of rain, drawing Laura's attention to her partner. A large German shepherd, his fur soaked from the downpour, stood at her side, ears pricked and eyes focused intently on the house. His name was Max. Max had been with her for 6 years, a partner more loyal than most people she knew. But Max wasn't just a canine unit dog. He was something more, something that had helped Laura crack more cases than she cared to count. And sometimes, like now, he had a way of sensing things that humans couldn't, a way of finding clues that others missed. Laura took a deep breath and gave him a nod. "Let's see what you've got, boy." Max's nose twitched as he took a step forward, his nose skimming the damp ground, inhaling deeply. He moved with purpose, pausing only once, to lift his head as if listening. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he took off toward the back of the house, his paws slipping slightly on the slick pavement. "Easy, Max," Laura murmured as she jogged to catch up with him. They passed the overgrown hedges, the yellowed windows, and the old garden where nothing grew anymore. She could feel her pulse quicken, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. This house held too many secrets. Max slowed as they reached a narrow path leading to the back of the house. He stopped abruptly, his nose still to the ground. His tail, usually a steady metronome of alertness, wagged slowly as he stood stock still. Laura crouched beside him, following his line of sight. There, half buried under a pile of damp leaves, was something she hadn't expected to find. A shoe, a child's shoe, old, worn, and nearly buried, but there it was. Laura's heart skipped a beat. She leaned forward, brushing away the soggy leaves, her hand trembling slightly. The shoe was small, too small for any adult. But it wasn't just the shoe that unsettled her. It was the way it was placed. It had been hidden, deliberately. "Max, good boy," she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and apprehension. Max gave a low whine and nudged the shoe toward her with his nose, his eyes fixed on her with an almost pleading look. He knew what it meant. Laura swallowed hard and reached down, pulling the shoe free from the earth. She examined it closely, noting the small scuff marks on the sole and the faded stitching. It was nothing special, but it was enough. It was a clue, something she hadn't seen before in the case files, something that hadn't been found 30 years ago. "Why would someone hide a child's shoe here?" she muttered, staring at it. She could feel the weight of the unanswered questions pressing on her chest. Ella Kavanaugh, was she involved? Had she hidden something here, or had she left a trail behind her that no one had ever thought to look for? Her heart raced as the realization hit her. The shoe could be the key. This was something new, something that could unravel the entire case. She reached for her radio, her fingers trembling. "Unit 9 to dispatch. I need backup. We've got a new lead on the Kavanaugh case." There was a brief, static pause before the voice on the other end replied. "Copy that, Detective. What's the lead?" "A shoe," she said, trying to steady her breath. "A child's shoe. It's been hidden out here in the back of the Kavanaugh house. I need forensics out here immediately." "Understood," the voice responded. "We'll have a team on their way." Laura stood up, holding the shoe in her hand. Her mind was already racing. Could this be the missing piece she had been waiting for? Was this a clue left behind by Ella Kavanaugh, or was it a sign of something even darker lurking in the past? Max let out another low growl, his attention fixed on the ground. Laura turned to him, her heart pounding as she watched him sniff the air. She had learned over the years that Max wasn't just good at finding things. He could sense when something wasn't right. "We're not done here, boy," she murmured, her eyes scanning the perimeter. "There's more to this." Max's ears perked up, and he trotted toward the edge of the property, pulling Laura along with him. He stopped by a small tree, its bark worn smooth with age, and sat down, his gaze unwavering. Laura followed his gaze and noticed something she had missed before, a faint, almost imperceptible set of footprints leading off into the woods behind the house. She knelt down and examined the prints. They were small, likely from a child, but there was something else. A trail of blood, too faint to be immediately noticed, marked the path. This wasn't just a clue. This was a story of someone trying to escape. "Ella," Laura whispered. Under her breath, the name of the missing girl, a haunting echo in her mind. Max barked once, sharply, as if urging her to follow. And follow she did. Laura's heart raced as she followed Max into the woods behind the Kavanaugh house. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the weight of unanswered questions. Every step she took felt like it echoed in the silence of the woods, a silence that had been broken only by Max's low growls and the faint crunch of leaves underfoot. The trail was faint but unmistakable. Small footprints, barefoot from the look of it, led deeper into the woods, snaking between the trees. The blood stain, though thin and barely visible in the dim light, was enough to tell her that whoever had left it was hurt, but still moving. Max's nose stayed close to the ground, his movements deliberate as he sniffed the air, then the earth, and then picked up the trail again. He was a trained canine, capable of tracking scents that most humans could never even pick up. But this was different. This wasn't just a trail of blood. It was a trail of desperation, a trail that told a story of someone running from something. Or someone. Laura's pulse quickened as she quickened her pace to keep up with Max. She couldn't help but wonder if the trail belonged to Ella Kavanaugh. Could it be? Could this be the girl who had vanished all those years ago, whose body was never found, whose fate had haunted the case from the very beginning? Her mind raced, running through the possibilities. If Ella had been alive all these years, if she had been hiding out here in the woods, what had kept her from coming forward? And why had she waited all this time? As they pressed deeper into the woods, the trees grew thicker, their branches twisted and gnarled, forming a canopy that blocked out most of the fading light. The air felt colder here, a sharp bite to it that had nothing to do with the weather. It was a sense of something old, something hidden, settling in the depths of the woods. Max led her to a small clearing. His body stiffened, his eyes scanning. The area before he sat down with a soft whine, signaling that they had arrived. Laura stepped cautiously into the clearing, her gaze sweeping the area. The trees surrounding them seemed to close in, leaving only the faintest trace of sunlight to filter through the branches. But something caught her eye. In the center of the clearing, hidden beneath a low-hanging branch, was a small wooden box. Its edges were worn, the wood faded from years of exposure to the elements, but it was distinct enough to stand out against the natural landscape. Laura's breath caught in her throat as she moved closer to it. Max's nose twitched as he stood beside her, his body tense, waiting for her to open the box. Carefully, Laura crouched down and lifted the lid. Inside, the contents were simple but telling. A small, crumpled piece of paper, yellowed with age, lay at the bottom. She pulled it out, careful not to tear it. The paper was fragile, as though it had been there far too long, exposed to the weather and the passage of time. She unfolded it with a steady hand. The words, written in a hurried scrawl, read, "If you want to find me, you must follow the light." Laura's heart pounded in her chest as she reread the message. There were no other words, no clues to guide her further, just that one cryptic sentence. If you want to find me, was it Ella? Was it her? Or was this someone else? Someone who had been hiding out here, waiting for the right moment to speak. Either way, the words were clear. This was no ordinary clue. This was a message, and it was meant for someone. Laura glanced down at Max. The dog's head was tilted, his eyes locked on her, as though he understood exactly what she was thinking. Max barked once, as if urging her to move. "I know," Laura muttered. She stuffed the note into her pocket and stood up. "We're not done here." She scanned the clearing once more, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of uncovering something big. But what? And why had this been hidden here in the woods, in the place that no one had thought to look? Max turned and began to move back toward the trees, leading Laura further into the woods. His pace was quickening now, the sense of urgency in his movements palpable. Laura kept up, the feeling in her gut growing stronger. As they moved, the woods seemed to close in even more. The trees grew thicker, blocking out the last rays of daylight, until it felt as though they were walking in a perpetual twilight. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp moss and something else, something metallic, as though the earth itself had absorbed years of blood and sorrow. Max's steps faltered for a moment. His tail, usually held high and confident, drooped. He stopped at the base of an old oak tree, its bark gnarled and twisted, as if time had etched its memory into every fiber of the trunk. Laura's heart skipped a beat. There, hidden in the hollow of the tree, was a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She could barely make it out in the dim light, but she knew it was there. The bloodstains on the cloth were unmistakable. Carefully, Laura reached out and untied the cloth, revealing its contents. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside, nestled against the cloth, was a small weathered photo. It was old, the edges frayed and curling with age. But even in the dim light, the image was clear enough. A young girl, maybe 12 or 13, stood in front of the Kavanaugh house, smiling with a happiness that seemed so out of place now, given the horror that had unfolded there. It was Ella Kavanaugh. But there was something else in the photo that made Laura's stomach drop. A shadow in the background, a figure, and that figure was standing just behind Ella, watching her, lurking in the dark. Max let out a low growl, his eyes narrowing as he sniffed the photo. Laura's hands shook as she stared at the image. She had seen that figure before, in the old case files. A man who had been associated with the Kavanaugh family years ago. A man who had disappeared after the murders, never to be found again. "Jesus," Laura whispered, her voice barely audible. She turned the photo over, hoping for some clue, some name, something, but there was nothing, only a single word, scrawled in faint ink. "Run?" The message was clear and chilling. Run. Laura's fingers trembled as she held the photo. The single word burned into her mind. She could almost hear the urgency in those letters, as if they were meant for her. But who had written it? Why? And who was the figure standing behind Ella? Kavanaugh in the photo? The shadows hid most of his features, but his presence was unmistakable. Max growled again, his eyes fixed on the tree where the photo had been found. It was as though he, too, understood the gravity of the situation. His ears were pressed back against his head, his body low to the ground, as though sensing something unseen in the woods around them. Laura stood up slowly, her mind racing. Her first instinct was to get out of the woods, to return to the safety of the Kavanaugh house, where she had left the shoe. But something in her gut told her that she couldn't leave yet. Not until she had answers, not until she understood who the figure in the photo was and why they had been connected to this case. Max turned and trotted back toward the narrow path they had followed into the woods. His tail was still low, but his pace was purposeful. Laura hesitated for a moment, staring down at the photo in her hand, before slipping it into her jacket pocket and following him. As they made their way back toward the house, the weight of the photo seemed to press down. On her chest, she had to find out who that figure was. And more importantly, she had to find out why he had been watching Ella. When they reached the clearing near the house, the drizzle had turned into a steady rain. The sky had darkened further, and the world seemed to have quieted, as though holding its breath. Laura pulled her jacket tighter around herself, the chill of the rain creeping through her clothes. Max stopped in his tracks, his body stiffening once again. He stood with his head lifted, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. Then, without warning, he barked once, a sharp warning bark that cut through the silence. Laura's heart skipped a beat. She was no longer alone. "Show yourself," Laura called out, her voice firm, though her pulse was hammering in her ears. Her hand instinctively moved to her gun, but she didn't draw it yet. Not until she knew who or what was out there. Figure emerged from the trees, its movement slow and deliberate. At first, Laura thought it was just a shadow, some trick of the rain and the low light, but as it came closer, the details became clearer. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat that seemed to blend into the night. His face was obscured by a hood, but his presence was unmistakable. Laura's heart clenched in her chest. It was him, the figure from the photo. He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Laura's face. Max growled, his hackles raised, but the man didn't flinch. He simply stopped, standing a few feet away from Laura, and then, to her surprise, he spoke. "You're looking for answers, detective," he said in a low, gravelly voice that seemed to echo in the stillness. "But you might not like what you find." Laura's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. The man didn't answer immediately. He took a slow step toward her, his movements calculated, as though he was sizing her up. Then finally he spoke again. "My name is Caleb," he said, his voice cold and emotionless. "And I was there that night. I saw everything." Laura's pulse raced. "What do you mean? What happened to Ella?" Caleb's eyes flicked briefly. "To the Kavanaugh house." Then back to her. "Ella wasn't the one you should have been looking for. You're chasing ghosts." The words struck Laura like a slap to the face. "What the hell does that mean?" she asked, her voice rising. Caleb's expression darkened, and he looked past her into the distance. "You want to find the truth, detective? You need to stop chasing shadows. You're asking the wrong questions." Laura felt a pang of frustration. "I'm asking the right questions. Ella Kavanaugh is missing. Her parents are dead. The case has haunted me for years, and now I find a photo with some ghost in the background, and you show up claiming to know what happened?" Her voice cracked with the weight of all her doubts and confusion. "I've heard enough of your cryptic bullshit. Tell me what you know." Caleb seemed unfazed by her outburst. He was calm, too calm. It was as if this conversation, this moment, had already been decided long ago. "Ella wasn't just a victim," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "She was part of something much bigger, something you're not ready to understand." Laura's head spun with confusion. "What are you talking about?" Max barked again, sharp and insistent, drawing her attention away from Caleb for a split second. She turned her head just enough to see Max staring past her, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open as though he were watching something or someone else. Caleb's face twisted into something between a smirk and a frown. He stepped forward, his voice lowering to a near whisper. You think you're uncovering the truth, but you're just scratching the surface. There are things buried here that you can't even begin to understand." Laura's eyes narrowed. She wasn't about to let him intimidate her, not now. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me everything you know." Caleb took a step back, his posture defensive. "You don't want to know everything, detective. Trust me." Max barked once more, louder this time, his ears flat against his head as he stepped forward, his body tense and ready to spring. Caleb froze. Laura took a step toward him, her gun still holstered, but her hand hovering close. "Tell me the truth now." The man's eyes flicked back to the Kavanaugh house, then to the woods behind them. He hesitated for a long moment before speaking again. "Ella isn't the only one who disappeared that night," he said quietly. "There were others who have been hiding for decades, and you're about to make the mistake of finding them." Laura's heart sank. The weight of his words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, Caleb turned and melted into the darkness, disappearing as swiftly as he had come. Laura stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest, trying to process what had just happened. Max growled low, his eyes scanning the shadows. The answer was out there, and now, more than ever, Laura knew she had to find it. The rain had stopped, but the feeling of dread lingered in the air, thick as fog. Laura stood alone in the clearing, the sound of her breath and Max's quiet growls the only noise that filled the silence. The figure, Caleb, had vanished into the night, leaving behind a trail of unsettling words that seemed to echo in her mind. Ella wasn't the only one who disappeared that night. There were others who have been hiding for decades, and "You're about to make the mistake of finding them." What did he mean by that? Laura's mind raced, her thoughts tumbling over one another as she turned the words over in her head. She couldn't shake the image of Caleb's face, calm, almost amused, as he spoke to her. It was as though he knew something she didn't, something important. But what? Max, sensing her uncertainty, trotted over and nudged her gently with his nose, a comforting gesture that grounded her. She scratched behind his ears, grateful for his presence. She couldn't let fear or doubt stop her now. If anything, Caleb's cryptic warning only made her more determined to uncover the truth. She needed answers, and she needed them now. "Let's go back to the Kavanaugh house," Laura muttered, glancing toward the shadows of the woods that stretched behind them. "We've got work to do." Back at the Kavanaugh house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The house stood dark and still, its windows blank eyes watching from the shadows. Laura was determined to get to the bottom of things, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. After a quick call to the station, she'd arranged for backup. Detective Frank Hall, her partner and trusted friend. Frank was skeptical about the whole case from the start, but Laura knew he'd take it seriously now. The mystery had gone beyond just a missing person. It was a dark web of lies, secrets, and something more dangerous. When Frank arrived, Laura was already pacing around the front yard, Max by her side, still on alert. His senses were sharp, and his quiet demeanor spoke volumes. Something was off, and he knew it. "Hey, Hall," Laura greeted him, trying to sound more composed than she felt. "Glad you could make it," Frank gave her a terse nod. "This better not be another wild goose chase, Laura. You've been on this case for months now, and all we have are dead ends. What's changed?" Laura met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "Everything's changed. I found someone, a man named Caleb. He knows more about this case than we thought, and he's not just some random guy. I think he's connected to Ella's disappearance." Frank raised an eyebrow but said, "Nothing," waiting for her to continue. "Ella Kavanaugh isn't the only one who went missing that night," Laura continued. "There were others, people who disappeared too. But no one ever talked about it. It's as if the whole thing was covered up." "Covered up?" Frank asked, his voice skeptical. "You think there's some conspiracy here?" Laura nodded. It's not just Ella's case that's been swept under the rug. There's more to it, something bigger. I found a photo today, Frank. A photo of Ella. But there was someone else in it. Someone watching her. And I'm pretty sure Caleb was involved. Caleb. Frank frowned. The guy you just met in the woods. How do you know he's not just some weirdo trying to mess with you? Laura took a deep breath, steadying herself. I know he's connected. And I don't think he's lying. She walked over to the car, retrieving the photo she had found in the woods. She handed it to Frank, who stared at it for a long moment. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the shadowy figure standing behind Ella in the picture. You think this guy's important? Frank asked, his tone now more serious. I know he is, Laura replied. I just don't know how yet. Frank handed the photo back to her, his jaw clenched. All right. So what now? Laura looked over at the Kavanaugh house. She could feel the weight of the investigation settling on her shoulders. Now, we dig deeper. We go through everything. The old case files, the evidence. There has to be something we missed, something that ties all of this together. Frank sighed, but nodded in agreement. I'll get started on the paperwork. You think Caleb's going to show up again? I don't know, Laura replied, shaking her head. But I have a feeling he's not done with us. He's testing us, trying to see how far we're willing to go, and I don't think he's the only one who's been watching. The hours passed slowly as they combed through old files and evidence, searching for any connection to the people who had vanished that night. But the more they searched, the more questions arose. No matter how many names they crossed off the list, there were more missing persons, more dark secrets buried beneath the surface. Laura sat at the table, the weight of it all settling on her chest. Max lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, alert but quiet. The room felt cold, and the stack of files in front of her seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. She was no closer to the truth than she had been the night Ella had disappeared. And then, just as she was about to give up for the night, something caught her eye. It was a name, one she hadn't seen before. A name buried deep in the case files, one that didn't belong. It was written in the margins, a note scribbled in pencil, as if someone had been trying to hide it. Laura's heart skipped a beat as she leaned in closer. The name was familiar. It was Caleb's. Caleb Pierce. She flipped through the pages quickly, her hands trembling as she scanned the rest of the file. The more she read, the more she realized just how connected Caleb was to the Kavanaugh case, not as a witness, but as a suspect. He had been under investigation for his ties to a criminal organization operating in the area at the time of the disappearances. But the investigation had been closed abruptly, and the file had been marked as unsolved. A knot tightened in her stomach. Caleb hadn't just been a bystander. He was involved, and now he was playing games with her, testing her patience, drawing her deeper into the tangled web of lies and deceit that had been spun all those years ago. Laura stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. We need to find him now. Max's ears perked up at her command, and Frank looked up from the file he was studying. What's going on? I know who Caleb is, Laura said, her voice low but firm, and I know what he's hiding. It's time to confront him. Frank nodded, his expression serious. Let's go get him. Laura didn't wait for another second. She gathered the files in her hands, pushing them aside to make space for the next step in this investigation. Max stood up, sensing the change in the air, and padded over to her side, ready for whatever came next. Frank was already on his phone, coordinating with the team for backup. The time for sitting in the shadows and uncovering clues was over. They had found enough, and now it was time to confront the man at the heart of this case. Caleb Pierce. Where do you think he's hiding? Frank asked, his voice serious as he hung up the phone. Laura glanced at the file one last time. Caleb's name, scribbled in the margins, wasn't just a name anymore. It was a thread that tied together the chaos of Ella's disappearance and the other unsolved cases from that night. The more Laura thought about it, the more it became clear that Caleb had always been at the center of the storm. He had been running the show, pulling the strings, all while hiding in plain sight. "He's got a safe house somewhere nearby," Laura said, her voice cold with certainty. "We know he's been in the area for years, and he's always one step ahead of us. But now we've got him. He's slipped up, and I'm not letting him get away." Frank nodded grimly, reaching for his gun. "Let's go then." Max's eyes locked on Laura's, his body tensing as they prepared to leave. It wasn't just a search anymore, it was a confrontation. And Max knew the stakes were higher than ever. The rain had begun again, the heavy downpour soaking through their jackets as they drove toward Caleb's last known location. The streets were nearly empty, the world swallowed by the storm, leaving only the flashing lights of their squad cars to illuminate the road ahead. Laura's mind was focused, her thoughts sharp. They had a plan. Find Caleb, bring him in, and get the truth. No more games, no more riddles. She wasn't walking into another trap. This time, she was the one calling the shots. They pulled up in front of an old warehouse just outside of town, its windows dark and its doors locked. It was the perfect hideout, remote, unassuming, and well hidden from prying eyes. Caleb had chosen his location well, but it wouldn't be enough to stop them. "Stay close," Laura ordered, her voice steady as she reached for her gun. Max was by her side instantly, his keen eyes scanning the area. Frank moved in behind them, keeping his pace steady. They approached the warehouse cautiously, each step deliberate. The rain was a constant hiss, drenching their clothes and adding an extra layer of danger to every movement. But nothing could deter Laura now, not after everything she had uncovered, not after all the years of waiting for this moment. As they reached the door, Max's low growl interrupted the silence. Laura looked down at him, and his eyes were fixed on the door ahead of them, alert. She gave a small nod, understanding that they were close. Frank reached for the door handle, but before he could turn it, a voice echoed from the darkness. "You think you're going to catch me?" Laura's breath caught in her throat as she spun toward the sound. Caleb Pierce stood in the doorway, his face partially obscured by the shadows. His expression was calm, as if he hadn't just been playing a dangerous game with them. It was the same twisted amusement she had seen earlier. He had been waiting for them. "We already have," Laura said, her voice low but steady. "We know what you've been hiding." Caleb let out a soft laugh, a hollow, empty sound. "Hiding? No, Laura. I've been waiting. Waiting for you to figure it all out. You always were sharp, but you were never meant to uncover the truth. You weren't meant to find this place." Max's growl deepened, a warning to the man who had manipulated them from the start. Caleb's eyes flickered to the dog, and for a brief moment a shadow of unease passed over his face. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold smile. "You don't understand," Caleb continued. "The people you've been chasing, the ones who disappeared, they were never going to be found. Not by you, not by anyone. Because they never wanted to be found." Laura stepped forward, her grip tight on her gun. "You're wrong, Caleb. They didn't want to be found by you. You've been hiding behind lies, covering up your tracks for years. But it ends now." He took a step back, his eyes narrowing, and for a moment it seemed like he might run, but instead he reached into his jacket, pulling out a small device, a detonator. "Not before you see what I've built," Caleb said, his voice low and menacing. Before Laura could react, there was a sharp click, a loud noise from somewhere deep inside the warehouse. Her heart stopped as she realized what he had just done. "Get back!" Laura yelled to Frank as she pushed him away, her mind racing. Max barked, instinctively moving to shield her. The warehouse door slammed shut with a deafening thud. The room around them filled with smoke as the lights flickered, and an explosion rocked the building. The entire structure shuddered, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to collapse. For a split second, everything went black, but Max, her brave German shepherd, was there. He never faltered. The blast had taken Caleb by surprise. He was thrown back, but Laura could see him, struggling to rise. Max, already on the move, was on top of him in an instant. With one strong shove, the German shepherd pinned Caleb to the ground, his jaws near Caleb's throat. Caleb let out a strangled scream, but didn't have the strength to fight back. His grip on the detonator was lost. Frank quickly secured the device, while Laura moved in to arrest Caleb. The entire warehouse seemed to be crumbling around them, but they were safe for now. Laura crouched down next to Caleb, looking into his eyes, with a mix of contempt and relief. It's over. Epilogue. The storm had passed by the time Laura and Frank returned to the station, Caleb in custody. The case was officially closed, but for Laura, the victory was bittersweet. The truth had come at a heavy cost, and while Caleb was behind bars, the memories of the lost lives would never fade. Max, ever loyal, sat beside her, his presence a constant comfort. Together, they had faced down the darkness, and together, they had won. But in the quiet of the night, as they left the station for the last time, Laura couldn't help but wonder if the truth they'd uncovered was the end, or just the beginning.